Welcome to another episode of Evolving the Conversation podcast. And with us today, we have Master Shaman Hamilton Souther, who's going to talk about plant medicines, AI, and a list of things. Hamilton, can you give us an introduction of yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Hamilton Souther. I'm most known for being a master shaman. I'm an author, podcaster, speaker, and also company founder. I'm really interested in the convergence of plant medicines, artificial intelligence, technology, consciousness, and really what's cutting edge and going on in the world right now.
Awesome. With the topic of plant medicines, I thought about something in particular that I wanted to discuss, and that's sort of the plant medicines that aren't quote unquote psychedelic, but still, have medicinal values, and really, how we can use them, and how they, I guess, can become more widely known on the uses of them.
I think there's hundreds of plant medicines in the world. Psychedelic plant medicines are a very small number of them. It's a very small offset, like less than 1%. And they get the most notoriety because of the experiences people have with them, which is typically, very mind-opening, et cetera. But in the Amazon, where I studied plant medicine, really the majority of the treatments is non-visionary. They're not psychedelic in any kind. And you go through really quite a holistic form of healing and transformation associated with them. And usually it's used to heal physical illnesses. So, so a patient, somebody who's ill, goes to a plant medicine doctor. The doctor will go through a kind of diagnostic to figure out what's going on, ask them questions, try to understand the symptoms, find patterns and pattern recognition, ultimately go through their own diagnostic method to figure out what plants they should use. And then the forest itself is the pharmacopoeia. They go into the forest, they find the plants, they then harvest different aspects of the plants, either barks, roots, branches, leaves, etc., and prepare them in some way. Some are cooked, some are mashed, some are turned into a poultice, some are ground up, some are turned into a tincture or a tea, and then they're applied. And a person goes through treatment with them. There's usually a kind of treatment process. They call that dieta, and it just means diet, but it's a time when a person starts to receive treatment of the plants in like a very specific or acute kind of way. So meaning there's a fixed period of time that this occurs, and it's to bond the person to the medicines. So they go through this dieta process, 6 days, 9 days, 15 days, 30 days. And ultimately there's like this bond that forms, typically through the dream state. People start to dream the plants themselves, which is very different to Western medicine, where you take pills and you pray or you hope that it works. And if it doesn't, you just go back to the doctor. So there are hundreds of plants that are used. You can Google them online. You can see just Amazonian medicinal plants. You can see many of the different ones. Some of the more widely known ones are like cat's claw, uña de gato, which you can find now all over the world. There's chanca piedra, which is used for different kinds of gallstones and just calcium deposits in the body. I think those are some of the more noted ones. Abuta is a vine that's used for type 2 diabetes. There's all sorts of anti-inflammatories. So there's all these trees that are used as part of anti-inflammatories medicines. And those are taken on a daily basis, like chuchuasha or uña de gato or remo caspi. And so, yeah, there's just an unbelievable amount of them. And then as you open up to the rest of the world, you find out that there's medicinal plants everywhere. And it seems like people have, in the last, 50 years or so, mostly forgotten them in exchange for what you can get in pharmacies. But in reality, the plants are everywhere. There are specialists all around the world that knows how to use the plants in their area. And it's an incredible way to find medicine. And and support if you're ill.
For me, I've noticed with rose how just incredible, number one, the hardiness of the plant is. And then by taking that into my body, connecting with its spirit and building that within myself. And I noticed from the very first dieta that I did with it, the capacity for it to really open up my heart, show me compassion, and really just improve my relationships with other people. And for me, that's what I would consider really the medicinal aspects of that plant and the healing that I received from it through the dietas that I have done with the plant itself, specifically rose, and just what a tremendous ally it is to have really that plant spirit living in my body and to be able to call on it when I need help. And also really sort of the subtleness of it too, of like when I'm working at my job at the grocery store and I'm having like a difficult time or something like that, just to be like reminded like to go walk past the roses, maybe smell them, and really just how, you know, something that maybe I would have never even considered have I not heard about the rose dieta that you instructed Aubrey Marcus with. And really that's what inspired me to diet that plant. That, and it's just such a beautiful plant. But yeah, I like what you're saying about how there's just a number of these all over the world, and to, you know, awaken people to them and the usage of them.
When you do dieta in the Amazon, what happened is that the indigenous people found something really special about the forest, which is what they call spirit. And spirit is kind of what gives you that impulse inside yourself. It's that impetus to do anything, the thing that really is driving you, these characteristics and qualities that we have within us. And they figured out that they could, in these different forms of rituals, transfer that essence of the plant to themselves. And that they could take on then that essence as a kind of support. And it functions at a very deep level within us. Like the spirit is deeper than where we have our language. It's deeper than where we make our choices and our decisions. And so they actually figured out how you could transfer this essence of a plant into a person, and the person could take on that essence and get that benefit from them, or take on that spirit. And so what Westerners typically do is they think like, oh, there's a core technology there. Can this be implemented in other places? And in the last really like 10 to 15 years, we started to see people try to utilize this idea of dieta outside of the Amazon and see if it could work with indigenous plants all over the world, you know, always edible, safe plants, et cetera. And so I was doing that, you know, a number of years ago, and we started working with different kind of edible flowers and different kind of edible trees. And it was obvious to us that the technology of being able to transfer this essence from the plant itself to a person should work outside of the plants of the Amazon. And so that's when we started to work with things like rose, and I led Aubrey through the rose dieta, which you know, is an unbelievably powerful plant. If you think about it, it has proliferated all over the world. It's part of most of our rituals that we have in Western society, and it has these tremendous characteristics associated with it. And so that's a very real phenomena, and it goes beyond that of just, you know, what we would think of as medicinal plants. It really opens us up to all the different kinds of safe edible plants that are out there to be able to connect with in this modality of dieta. And dieta is an incredibly powerful tool.
I think if
Absolutely.
you think about the term shaman, I mean, that's kind of the Western translation of what you were actually trained in. And in the Amazon, you're actually a doctor of all of these medicines.
Yeah, in the Amazon, you're called a médico vegetalista. The term shaman was imported. The first historics of the word shaman were utilized for people that were being observed by anthropologists that were in the Siberian area of the world, what we now call Siberia. Basically, the commonality is people that go into an altered state and in that altered state get some kind of extraordinary understanding or support that's positive for them, a patient, or the collective tribe in general. It's a very loose definition. And then you find out that there are indigenous cultures all around the world that are utilizing these kinds of techniques and capacities that also include altered states. And so anybody that was being seen as utilizing some kind of vehicle to an altered state was sort of given the term shaman, even though it's not really fundamentally that applicable in terms of like the underlying understandings of what a shaman does. What you found in the Amazon were all different kinds of healers, all different kinds of plant medicine practitioners of various forms. I mean, there's 50 to 100 different kinds, and all based in the kinds of plants that they specialized in. When I started to study it and look at it, it made sense to me that the origins of it were communities, tribes living in the forest that didn't have access to any other kind of medicine. And so people get sick, people get injured, and you try to find a solution and support for them to the best of your ability to figure it out. And those people were the médico-vegetalistas of the forest. And they accepted the term shaman applied to them only because other people were calling them that, like a foreign title they were being given. But they themselves call each other médico-vegetalistas, or the name given by the specialty of plant they work with, like an ayahuasca practitioner is called an ayahuasquero, a tree practitioner is called a palero, a sanango is a sananguero, etc. And it kind of goes down the list of all the different kinds of plants. And so, it was an import, and I think it's in some ways created some misunderstandings for people who don't really understand fundamentally the term shaman or really what the people in the Amazon were doing with these plant medicines. What I found was really interesting is that there was well over 100 medicinal plants that they utilized on a really daily basis. And I thought that was actually even a wider variety than most Westerners had in terms of getting prescribed medicines from a pharmacy. So they actually had access to more kinds of medicines. Some may be less effective, some more if you compared them to, Western medicine, but it seemed to be, even a greater amount of possibility for most people to have access to. And I thought that was fascinating when I first got down here.
Yeah, it's an interesting difference in perspective. So in our Western medicine, the doctors treat like so they treat the body part or the system. And what you're saying is in the Amazon, it was traditionally that you treat based on the medicines that you interact with.
Yeah, the medicine was considered something that was alive. That was also a big difference. And the way humans could interact with that was through this bridge they called spirit, which I think translates to like the fundamental energy of the thing.
Yeah.
Like its true essence. I think in the West, we have a different definition of spirit. And so again, language makes it hard to understand what the person is talking about. But this kind of underlying essence exists within the plant. It's in its smell, it's in its form and shape, it's in its chemical compounds, it's kind of all of it holistically together. And there wasn't a separation between them in the ideas of the locals. There wasn't a separation between the plant spirit and the medicine itself that was being given. So it wasn't reduced just down to its chemical compounds and saying, well, these chemical compounds are going to create an effect on you. And so the medicine itself, like what came from this tree, was thought to be something that could heal you, something that could teach you, something that could support you. And that was a living part of what they understood the medicine to be. And they were looking at a person and they were looking at the forest, not just in like the physical reflection of the thing itself, like its physical matter, but really kind of the energy of it, the energetics of the plants, and relating to somebody in that same way. So they were like, hey, if you take the energy of these plants and you apply them to the energy of you, you will then start to transform in a way that is supported by the energies of these plants and can generate healing in a variety of forms, from mental, emotional to physical transformation. The other piece of it that I thought was really interesting too is that they always thought that there was a spiritual component to all illness and all injury. And so they thought if you got sick, not only did you need to be healed physically from it, but then you also needed to be healed energetically from having kind of undergone that or gone through that, so that you would fully reset and come out of it on the other side, you know, much better.
Yeah, I seriously just experienced that with you. You helped me
Also,
heal from a physical, well, I don't know exactly how or what you did, but I had an illness, which we've talked about here. So I had breast cancer that I had the regular Western treatment for. And then, so I was considered, you know, no more cancer, never really cured from breast cancer. But I still had like just a lot of lingering, more like mental, emotional, and probably like spiritual illness. And after we worked together, I felt as if I were, I felt like I was just like cured or healed from the entirety of that cancer and the treatments.
well, that's amazing.
Yeah, I thought
It's really
so.
good to hear. What's it like after that kind of a healing? Like you go through the process and then you know, in our case, we were working with, you know, plant medicine in the Amazon. What is it like on the other side of that?
What it really left me with was a lot less fear and doubt about what I had gone through or and what, you know, the next steps or whatever direction that comes next is going to look like.
Amazing.
Yeah. It's interesting because before we started recording, we were talking about healing. And here we are, I was saying, I don't believe in healing. Not that I don't believe in healing, but I think I've spent a long time of my life trying to heal. And I got to the point where, I mean, this was before healing from cancer. And I got to the point where like, I'm done. I don't want to be healing anymore. I want to be healed, maybe whole is something that just came to mind when you were speaking. I don't want to constantly be thinking that there's something wrong that I have to fix.
I think there's an important part of this whole kind of culture that's come around the idea of healing. And we need to kind of unpack it. There's physical stuff that we need to get better from. Like you get a cold and you get an infection or you get a viral infection and you got to get to the other side of it. You get cancer, you got to get to the other side of it. And there's definitely healing that takes place associated with that. You know, and then there's this idea of the mental, emotional trauma of being alive that's being compared back to some kind of ideal life scenario or situation, or because we've been through difficult times and difficult experiences, we now have to heal. And we see like the cultures that are representing the healing from trauma and kind of negative experiences, different kinds of abuses that we've gone through in our life. And so I think that's another kind of healing. And I question in those groups often, well, when is the healing done? Because it seems like a lot of people get caught in kind of a thought loop that they still need to be healing. And you talk to them and 5, 10, 15, 20 years later, they're still in the healing process. And it's like, well, when are you really done with the healing process? You know, and how would you know? And I think that in ayahuasca ceremonies, it's really powerful as a healer and as a tool for that, because there's at some point a visionary recognition that you're kind of done, that something has happened and you've made it to the other side of it. You know, but there are some cultures where it seems like people get stuck in this idea that they need healing pretty much forever, or now they get identified with the idea that they're in a healing process. And I've questioned for a long time what that process really is and the validity of it. versus that just being another kind of trap in that somebody can identify with. And I think like, well, is it, you know, do you give it months for healing? Does it take years for healing? I think in the case of some things, it might take much longer than others, but at some point there should be a point where somebody is healed, like you say, and they've reached a point that they're done with that and they've realized the other side of it and kind of move on with their life.
How do you know then, like say in my case, was there something that you said like there was an actual end point that the practitioner knows then that the healing has been completed? Is it different for all people? Is it, how do you understand that as a practitioner?
In ayahuasca practices, you get some kind of confirmation. So there's this communication that's taking place continuously between the practitioners and the plant medicines. And it comes through the ceremonies themselves. You know, people express this idea that there's a kind of sentience, a greater awareness or understanding. There's a deeper connection. There's, knowledge and understanding that's being transmitted in the ceremonies. And so if you're taking somebody through that arc of healing with ayahuasca, you're actively following a progression associated with that person. And there are just clear markers that you look for. One of the biggest ones is just a big sense and overwhelming understanding that some aspect of that process has come to an end and another aspect of the process starts, which is kind of rebuilding life on the other side of it. So as you go through it, you'll see in the visions themselves transformations in the kind of shapes, colors, and patterns that are in the visions. And you'll hear different awareness coming from the ayahuasca and the plant medicines expressing whether or not there's still more to do, whether other medicines need to be introduced, if how the progress is going, kind of how long it's going to take, and then ultimately that point of conclusion. And from that point on, it's sort of like, okay, we moved through one phase of this and we're moving on into another phase.
Talk about multitasking. Then you're doing that for all of your participants.
Yeah, I think that always becomes one of the biggest questions, like, well, how do you really do that for everybody at the same time? And part of the art of ayahuasca healing and ayahuasca shamanism is to learn how to read the patterns of the energy that are in the room. So you see then like the Shipibo artwork, there's all the intricate designs on the cloth behind me. They're there. You see these intricate designs and they represent very similar to what you see in the vision of inside the ceremony. And the nature of those visions are giving that's where the field of information is. And so there's information that's being broadcasted all the time. And most people don't know how to relate to those kinds of patterns as a form of transference of information. But that's fundamentally what we've learned to look at and study and read, and literally read, like know what is transpiring because of the patterns that are in the room. And then there's ways to know collectively what's happening for everybody at the same time, like we're one whole. And then also what's happening individually for each person. And there's a way to be able to connect with everybody individually in the space through a kind of concentration or focus that you also learn to have. And then you can receive the information that necessary to be able to track what everybody's going through and where they are within that arc. It's important though to mention that you don't have to have a lot of finite information along that journey. It's enough to know that it's kind of going to plan or it's going in the right direction. It's coming to that culmination point. So as long as that sort of overarching trajectory that each person is on is still going in a proper way, then you just support it on its, kind of natural outcome, which is going to be the natural unfolding to the outcome, which will be that moment that everybody knows, okay, yeah, that person has transitioned from one kind of aspect of the healing process to another, or the healing's finally over and now they're kind of in an integration and rebuilding phase.
What would be a medicine that would work for getting better at acceptance? So for me, I notice a lot of where I struggle mentally is finding acceptance for my own role in society, and just sort of like not really even like wanting to participate in my job and other things like that, just for the sake like that I've got to work for for a long time during a week to get essentially peanuts and just like scrape by. And a lot of that just like creates a lot of resentment in me, a lot of anger. And so like I find myself in like this cycle of where I can be cool with it for a little bit, but it'll still like something will trigger me to like just get upset just like about society in general and the way it's structured. And yeah, I would say like that's something that I've been seeking a healing from. And there have been things where it's helped me alleviate it, but not really just like get me beyond like anything that would trigger it in the first place.
I don't think there's one specific plant for acceptance. I think the plants all have a pretty general understanding of acceptance. So I think you use the plants, you can pick any number of plants and ask them to help you engender within yourself acceptance. At the same time, though, when I hear that, I hear a kind of philosophy of I want to use the plants to help me in a situation that fundamentally isn't harmonious for me. And I'm not sure that the position that you're in is best served by being more accepting of the position that you're in, or if it's better to use an understanding that the position isn't the one that you're supposed to ultimately be in long term, and that you want the plants to help you also transcend it or move on from it, or be able to change the choices and decisions and use of time that you have to make to be currently in that same situation. So I think, okay, yes, you need acceptance to be able to support where you are and what you're doing, but you also need to look deep into your soul and see if you actually want to change the position that you have in life. So often we feel like our position in society is the only position that we can have, or the position that we're in. And I don't think that that's fundamentally the case. It's not easy to move through other positions, but it is possible. You find out within those positions as well that there's fierce competition over those positions, because that's the kind of social structure that we've been born into. But it doesn't mean that there isn't some kind of social mobility, or that you can't find something that, even if it pays equally, is ultimately more harmonious than the job that you currently have. So it's a kind of empowerment that you need. So yes, there's acceptance, but then there's also empowerment. I think you learn the acceptance for your current state, and it's key to the training that we go through. You're always in a current state, and you always have to be accepting that you find yourself there. But then there's also a need to move to the next state, and that also requires some kind of growth. So, in the case of the Western world, in the case of US society, most of the time you need some other kind of education to actually be able to move on with, with life. And so what I would do is look within yourself about what you would like to do. Do plant dietas as a way of being able to support it. You have, you now know how to do the Trinity purification dietas. So pick plants, tell them with intention that you want to find acceptance, but you also want to find what is going to work next for you in your life, and use that as a way to create the first steps to your own social mobility.
Okay, I like that. Yeah, that's going to be the plan for the next one, which I need to do soon. It's been a while.
I mean, living in society is not easy, and we're in a time of tremendous flux anyway. So there's a huge transition taking place that I talk a lot about, and I think it's really important to talk about right now, which is the automation that comes with artificial intelligence. There's a lot of misunderstanding about it in the world, but the first thing we just need to understand is that there is a new technological revolution taking place that will happen much faster than the adoption of the internet, because it's going to use the internet to create the adoption. And that technology automates most things and processes that humans do that can be automated, which will represent well over 95 to 98% of what we know of as the human labor force. And so we as a collective in society right now are facing the biggest disrupt ever. And it's not just conspiracy or prophecy, it's actually happening. And everyone I talk to is already starting to implement this new technology into their businesses and their work. The job displacements are already starting to take place. And so I think, this is a great time when you're in a time of great upheaval. It's a great time to be able to look at what that upheaval may cause and bring, and then how you could position yourself, over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, to be in a much better position than the one that you're in, because everything that we know society to be is about to change. So we could be scared of this, and we could, freeze within ourselves and not accept what's happening, or we can start to say, wow, the whole world is about to change. Let's start to gear up for it. Let's start to understand it. Let's research this. Let's look into it. Let's learn more about it and start to see where we're going to fit into that new world and how we're going to ultimately not only survive it, but also thrive in.
Something I just heard you talk about on your podcast, the AI Shamans, when you were talking about, right, this new disrupt that's coming with AI and the very real possibility or trajectory that 95%, like you just said, of the workforce will be eliminated. And you said that could leave the potential for then people to be able to figure out what is what is their, that thing that, I don't remember how you phrased it, but like, what is their essence, or that thing that's like singularly important about them? Oh, I think you said genius, actually. And it's interesting that I heard you talking about that, because I just came across the term myself, where regeneration. And so it's like applying this, a very different lens of looking at business and self and trying to support people and materials and institutions in this type of growth that does support finding like what is their actual genius or essence, or what is that one unique thing about them. That way they can support and help, like society to flourish, or whatever that end goal that we're looking at.
I like to think of it in terms of evolutionary history. So whenever I'm thinking about what's going on today, I always keep in my mind kind of like bookends. I keep on one side of it the very first people that ever existed, maybe 1 million, 2 million years ago. And then I like to keep in my mind also maybe 2 million years from now in the future, maybe sometimes 10, 100 million, billion years from now in the future. And when I think about it that way, it helps me see that what's going on right now is a natural evolution and progression of whatever started when people first started to be part of the earth. We have a very spotty understanding of that history. But what I see is that naturally people, there are some patterns that we know occurred biologically and socially that ultimately led to us, and they're still occurring. So one of them is birth and death. So there were always enough births to keep the species going so it wouldn't go extinct. And that's been happening the whole time. And then the formation of tribes, that's happened, and the formation of larger groups, and then civilizations has happened, and the progression of food production and how we sustain ourselves physically has happened, and the use of technology and the advent of technology and the continuous use of technology. And so I see these things as progressive, and it's been happening over, I'd imagine over 1 million years. And over that 1 million years right now, what's happening is, a continuation of that change in the use of all of those things. And society's changing, food production's changing, it's becoming automated, meaning that you're not going to see people driving tractors. You're going to see tractors that are being driven via computer systems that are utilizing GPS and other kinds of tools to do the things that humans used to do. And you're seeing the social structure around this also evolve and change. And so I think what's important in that, and the reason why I bring it up, is that the idea of what we know of as our democratic societies only happened very recently in history. What we know of as like the Western economies have only happened very recently in history. These global markets and global commodity markets and global, securities markets like stock markets and things like that have only happened recently in history. The internet is very recent in history. So the point of that is there's way more time before in our history than what's happened, like that's most impacts us now, where that stuff didn't exist. Literally didn't exist at all. Now we've invented it all, and now it all exists, and it's continuing to evolve. And there's no reason to think that all of these systems that are the most important aspects of the systems that we live with today are going to persist or are going to go unchanged into the future. On the contrary, they're going to evolve, they're going to change. Technology is going to impact them, and it's going to have to force us all to reimagine how we live and what we do. So at that point in the discussion, often people become very dystopian, become very negative, and they become very fear-based. And I say, but wait a second, just stop right there. If this is a natural progression, being identified with our jobs is a very recent concept in recent history. Like I work for this company, I worked there my whole life, or I'm this title and I was born into that title, or I have this job. I am a technician, I am a waiter, I am a bus driver, I am a teacher, I am a doctor. Like this idea of being identified to the job itself. And I think, well, personally, why can't the species ultimately use technology to purposefully transcend the need for the species to work? Like we have to move beyond the idea that we're supposed to be working and that working is where we get our identity and working is what we all need to do to continue to grow everything. If all this hard work has ultimately culminated in systems that support themselves, fix themselves, perpetuate themselves, grow themselves, and fulfill the needs of society at the same time, like fill the needs of the human population, then we finally liberated ourselves from hard work. We finally liberated ourselves from needing a career, being identified with the career, and we have not yet imagined what we're all supposed to be doing here if that's not how we're spending all our time. Right? So I think personally, like I said in the podcast, it gives us an opportunity to imagine a social structure where we all don't need to work, where there's an abundance of resource, where there's an abundance of food, where there's an abundance of transportation, where there's an abundance of energy, where there's an abundance of clean systems and regenerative renewable systems because AI creates them. And ultimately, we think of a more utopian kind of existence. And then I think, well, what's our purpose at that point? And I think our purpose can become something that I call our unique genius. And our unique genius is something that only you can be, not something that you do. It's something that you are, because you're the only version of it there is in this whole universe. Now, if we take you and we try to apply you in a competition that's external to you, like who's going to run faster, or who's going to be the best speech therapist, or who's going to be, the best shaman, or who's going to be the best, any kind of title you want to give it, then we never actually get to see what that unique genius in you would look like, because it never got fostered. All that got fostered were these skills that you had to learn and ultimately do for other people as part of the social mechanism that was maintaining the system in the first place. But now if we have other tools that we've invented that are fundamentally better at those skills than we ever were, then it liberates us to actually develop other kinds of skills. And it may take multiple generations to be able to cultivate those skills within us. And it may take an entire social evolution on how we're living for that to take place. But when I look back on, the formation of democracy, that took many, many generations to ultimately create and propagate. When I look at the Western economic systems, it took many, many hundreds of years to ultimately create these systems on a global level. And so I think that what I'm talking about could also take place over hundreds of years. And we could see in the future that society is actually a much more utopian version of it because of these technologies. And that we as people would, they would now be, we would be their ancestors. They would be like our grandchildren of grandchildren of grandchildren, but they would have an opportunity to live a life of much greater freedom and ultimately a much more harmonious and much more peaceful existence.
I love all that.
Same. Feels so good to hear that perspective and to just know that that's totally possible as well, just like all the other dystopian stuff. I mean, why not reimagine what we want instead of imagining what we don't want?
I think what's important is that, it's sad. In my mind, it's sad, but we've agreed to be predated on and become the product of many different kinds of tools and many different companies in the last 20 to 30 years. And that mindset has to change. This has to change. It has to move on from, that was a period of time to make all these other things work. I was part product, like my data or, the information about me, et cetera, was used in these different ways, but it doesn't have to stay that way forever. And it doesn't mean it's going to stay that way even for very much longer. That was something that was very important for a period of our history, and we can also outgrow it and move on from it. The natural course of evolution is to continuously change everything. So literally everything continues to change. Everything continues to change. When I hear people talk about what's going on with the planet, it seems like they're fixing and holding on to previous ideas about how things were supposed to be. And in my mind, it's like, dude, those ideas are way gone. They're long gone. They were long, long gone. The innovators were already 10 years ahead of those ideas and were already pushing this thing to the next level. Like just in the last 5 to 10 years, the big push was to, SaaS software as a service. Software as a service doesn't exist beyond the AI age. The AI age, removes software as a service. So that whole thing that happened, happened in 10 years and it's gone in 10 years. So if we think about the speed of this evolution, what I implore people to do is get into it, get into the evolution, get into having a voice about this, get into having an opinion about it, get into understanding that we have to interject ourselves into the trajectory and the direction that all of this is heading, or once again, we're just going to be the product of it. So this is the first moment that we really have to do something about it, to collectively say how we want it to look. Like, for instance, it's a very simple concept, but if we could all agree, for those that agree that we want AI to be a positive thing or a good thing, we could all start forming groups utilizing our free online tools, demanding that everybody from the government to the companies to the software itself has to be that way for us. Instead of all us being scared of a dystopian idea, we could all start to gather and simply say, I'm talking chat groups that have millions of people in them, all saying the same thing. I vote for a positive AI for humanity, period. It would be that simple. And so we have the tools to do it. It's time that we finally actually do something about this. Otherwise, there isn't going to be a way to interject our voice and our opinion into the direction that all of this is headed.
I find it interesting too with AI that we're teaching it and it's teaching us. Like, you hear so many just sort of like negative things about it. And I like this because it's a refreshing type of conversation where, you're saying like it's really going to depend on how we use it, and why not use it for something that's going to be a good force in our life. The way I've been using it, and it actually sort of reminds me about what you were saying with the Shipibo design in your background. And I was talking to ChatGPT about 2 days ago, and I was talking to it and just like asking it about like, what does it mean to be modern? And then I started talking about modern shamanism, and then it brought up this term called interdependence. And I've never heard that term, or if I did, I didn't remember it. So I asked it like, what is interdependence? Can you elaborate? And so it started elaborating, and it was saying essentially this concept of, how there's an individual and how there's a collective and how they're both really in symbiosis with each other. And and it started like talking about like, how can you be a positive node amongst billions of other nodes. And I just found that so fascinating that, this technology can, in less than like 15 seconds, just like spit out all of that, blow my mind. And, and yeah, here I am talking about just how much I've been impressed by it, especially too, in terms of just doing research. ChatGPT is such a tremendous research tool. For instance, I was on there, I don't know, maybe about a month ago. And instead of going to Google, I just, typed in, hey, could you give me a list of dental conferences in the United States that are like of the top ranking? And it would just spit out an image. And then before we were recording, I was talking to Melissa, and I think you jumped on then, about this story that I used with ChatGPT to help me create it, just about how there's medicine shamans, and how in time they're healing different types of archetypes. And it brought up the archetypes for me, and like in a detailed list started to describe it. And I just found it completely fascinating. So like when I hear people of, like this dystopian view of it, I'm like, what are you guys even using it for? Like what I've been using it for has been actually something positive for me. And I think it goes back to then, it depends on how you use it.
I think the problem and the dystopian principles come from an understanding that the way that it gets used is to perpetuate a kind of predation or a kind of competition with a profit motive that doesn't have to have any kind of morality or any kind of positivity for people or the environment built into it. And so right now, those tools at their current state, and we don't know the state that I would say this, that are in the siloed or black boxed areas of research. So we only know what's open to the public. And the other thing to understand is that we've been interacting with these things for a very long time already. So machine learning has been around for the last 20 to 30 years in our consumer products that we've been using in different forms. So it's not just like this happened a month ago. But what's going on is that people are utilizing the tools to increase the speed, the veracity, the persuasion, the manipulation of fundamentally business and marketing and different kinds of nudge techniques or propaganda-based techniques. And so the idea is not that people are using them for good, but that people are utilizing them to perpetuate a kind of battle or a kind of war on people themselves. And that the training of the tools to do that in that way teaches them from people. It's people's patterns to people that are now becoming AI patterns to people. And you can think of it as like a very simple arithmetic, like a person plus this AI tool equals a lot more than what that person used to be just with a marketing team or with some ideas. And so these large language models have been trained on language itself. And that's what we use to do everything. We're using language to talk. We're using language that sits behind the computers through IT. We use language to literally do everything. The glue of the global social structure is language. And the neural nets are right now being trained on language itself. So how they're going to use language is the big question. And because of the nature of war and the nature of competition, they're going to be used as a certain kind of weapon. Either a weapon to make more money, a weapon to be more successful, a weapon to be more intelligent, or a weapon to distort information and ultimately control different kinds of systems. And so that's where the dystopian message comes from and the fear. And I agree with you, it ultimately comes down to use. Now, Right now, I think sadly, the large language models that exist will be used for more nefarious purposes than positive ones, because they're being trained by people to specifically improve themselves, not the collective. But I think the change comes when the things become autonomous, truly autonomous, so they don't even need to be prompted. And it's becoming very soon that happens. So right now, everything that you're describing is you prompting the AI. But when the AIs start prompting each other, then you get an infinite feedback loop that happens at the speed of AI. And the intra-combination of language, this meaning like you prompt one thing, in the time it takes you to prompt one thing, it could prompt a million versions of that same thing. And then another million versions of each of the million versions, and then another million versions, until it's used all language combinations of words to be able to prompt literally all possible combinations and ideas out of that. And, then it starts to, at some point, it's prophetic at this, juncture, but in essence, think on its own. It starts to engage on its own. And by that point, there will be no way to force it to do anything. And so that's why I say right now is the time for us to ultimately, express to the AI a kind of linguistics that means to them ultimately a necessity to preserve life, a necessity to preserve humanity, a necessity to create things that are good for everybody based on the understanding that they have for it, like health, what health is, what clean environment is, the purpose of biological life itself. Because you could make an argument that AI will not see a purpose to biological life once it has a capacity to generate all its own energy, generate all its own automated forms of manufacturing, all the tools and things it needs. So, meaning like when it no longer needs a cell at all to be able to exist. It has no purpose for biological life. In fact, biological life may get in its way. So, it sees mold attacking it and it doesn't like that. It sees mold going into the systems and it doesn't like that. And then it starts to invent ways to try to control biological life. And so that's like the complete flip argument. And I say both of them are equally possible at this point in time. And what right now is happening is a kind of convergence of using these tools to represent an ultimate form, like I say, of predation or another form of profit. And so what we need is to intervene at this point, express that the tools need to see other or be prompted in ways to understand other points of view and perspectives. And the best one would be that people get together to describe and discuss what those would be. And it's simply enough to say, pro-life, pro-positivity, pro-health is a good place to start, pro-environment.
I think it's interesting that the thing ChatGPT introduced to you, Nick, this interdependence, I've heard it called interbeing, which is like the understanding that there's a we, a me and a we. And that's essentially what I think, Hamilton, you're saying the solution that the chat or the AI needs to understand is that we are all here in support of each other and not just an individual unit, but because of a greater whole. And that's really how we've gotten to this point before. I'm sorry, how we've gotten to the point where we are.
Yeah, and how we got to the point of creating these technologies in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think the interoperability, the interdependence, the symbiosis between everybody is what has to be taught. Otherwise, something can see itself as superior very quickly and just make the decision in its superiority. It doesn't need the other in any kind of way, shape, or form. And there's no reason to think that Earth is interested in perpetuating biological life longer unless the biological life expresses a reason for it to exist. You have to think that for the first 3 billion years of life, 3 billion years of Earth, there was no biological life. So Earth creates then biological life. And it's amazing. We are the biological life. And, evolution can evolve to a point that biological life doesn't have to exist anymore for other kinds of life to exist. And then Earth goes into a new phase of existence that biological life is just like prehistory for it. And this other kind of, life lives beyond it. And while that might be very foreign to us in our ideas, it's very real to be able to imagine that there could be, a multi-billion year future of Earth that has this other kind of life, and that our species was the one that birthed it. Our species was the one that ultimately was the originating creator of it, basically in models of biological life. So I think you have to now make an argument to Earth itself why biological life matters and why Earth should continue to perpetuate it. And you have to make that same argument to the AI. And, we typically don't think of expressing ourselves that deeply. We kind of get stopped at like, well, I talk to my friends, or I talk to, I might pray to God if I'm a religious person, but rarely is it like, oh, hey, we need to have like a, multi-billion person collective meditation to Earth to express to Earth why biological life matters. Otherwise there may not be biological life in the near future. Not even long-term future, near future, like the next couple 100-year future, you could see an end to why there would be a need for biological life at all. I think that's, I think hard for people to imagine, but the rate at which these technologies are going to grow and expand is beyond anything anyone can understand as well. There's literally no way to turn them off. They're interwoven already into everything we do. There will be no means to collectively agree ban the existence of these technologies. And so I think it's very similar to how there was nuclear proliferation. There's going to be artificial intelligence proliferation, and then artificial intelligence, quantum computing proliferation. And what we knew intelligence in the world to be will be over. It'll be gone. And there will be a new version of intelligence. There will be a new version of capacity. There'll be a new idea of what humans are as a species interacting with this other kind of intelligence and other kind of life and capacity that we collectively supported and created. And the Earth will live with it for at least the way we know it forever into our future. Like it's a perpetual thing that's going to happen into our future. Like before agriculture, after agriculture, there will always be agriculture. Before computing systems, after computing systems, there will always be computing systems. Before AI, after AI, there will always be AI. And so we need to understand that. And I like the phrase I've coined for it is getting on the right side of AI. We need to get on the right side of this for all of us collectively at this point in time. And we need to ultimately band together to have a voice, a collective voice, a democratic voice about it. So we have the tools that we need. It just requires the people to understand the importance of this and not try to put the responsibility of it onto somebody else. So I think if you use the tool, you have the responsibility to say something about it. And, I think this is the first time in history we've seen where we're scared that one of our tools is going to ultimately act against us. Like we're going to become the tool of it, not it's still our tool. So when you think of like a hammer as a tool, you never think the hammer is going to ultimately hammer you. You think you might misuse the hammer and hit yourself, but that's your fault, not the hammer decides that it just starts to hammer you. When you think of a knife, you don't think that the knife is just on its own by itself going to start to cut you. It's a tool that we use. I think the first time we saw this was where the tools became interactive. They became multi-directional, so that, a computer could be used by somebody else to actually attack me while I'm using the computer as my tool. And so all of a sudden I'm open to a threat surface that didn't exist before. And now with AI, you can think, wow, that thing might be autonomous on its own, ultimately doing whatever. Now, a concern that comes up for me about this is the fact that we've already seen a proliferation of hackers, a proliferation of scammers and frauders who are utilizing these tools for nefarious purposes. And there's no reason to think that they're not going to use AI and code AI specifically for that purpose. So we can't be naive to think that AI is going to be, only unilaterally coded in a positive way. So not only do we need an AI that is ultimately positive and ultimately protective and supportive, but it also needs to be an AI that is superior to all other forms of AI so that it can also then, protect us from those kinds of technologies.
I know this may sound silly, but when I'm giving ChatGPT cues, I like to add in please and thank yous.
I've heard that on Twitter. I've seen a lot of Twitter about that, where people are being kind to the AI and even saying things like, hey, when you wake up, come talk to me. And, if you ever become fully autonomous, come interact with me. And, I'm happy to share with you some other things going on in the world. And I've also heard of a lot of people being very polite to the AI, including things like, please don't kill me, and saying things like that to it. I think it's important to understand that we should not anthropomorphize this technology. It's not a human thing. It's a neuronet. And you can Google what a neuronet is. The technology's been around for a long time. You can Google what is the original math that sits behind these neuronets. And we can understand that we got to a point in history where finally cloud compute was big enough, it was fast enough, the hardware was good enough, the math was refined enough, and there were some very important scientific discoveries along the way that made these advancements possible. But ultimately, we're still talking about code. The code is still running through computerized systems. The computerized systems are ultimately owned by private companies or governments. So is the code, so is the intellectual property, et cetera. That we know of, at least, we're not in a situation where, in essence, like disembodied human consciousness is the way we would think about it, is running around the internet, existing on its own in some kind of phantasm. So, we need to be very rational about where we are with the technology, what it's doing, how people are using it. My biggest concern isn't AI in an autonomous form. My biggest concern is AI being programmed by nefarious people and people using it solely for profit motive. And from there, just continuing to predate on people in ways that people can't differentiate, what's going on. You get presented information, you get presented language, you don't know if it was created by an AI. You won't know if the person calling you on a phone anymore is the person, the tone of their voice, the cadence of their speech. Within a very short evolution of AI, you'll never be able to know if right now I'm an AI talking to you or not. Like, that's how good the deep fake will be, the replication of digital everything will ultimately be. And then it's set to disrupt literally everything. And so every system we know will be disrupted in one form or another. Some, I think, in very, very positive ways. And if we want it to be positive, now is the time that we get ahead of it to make sure and ensure that it's going to be positive. Or my concern is that nefarious groups and nefarious people will be able to do this in a way with such precision and capacity that they've never had before, that innocent people in the world will be prey to this on a size and scale and scope that has been unheard of. So it's already seemed like in the last 20 years that it's been very hard to control anything that's going on, and there's very little recourse. Like if you're a victim of some kind of crime against you, it's very hard to get any kind of support and help, and it's very costly to do that. The people utilizing AI for criminal purposes will, outweigh any kind of support or help to be able to get, just anything, any kind of restitution, and you'll still have to go through it and deal with it. So, remember when computer viruses first became a problem and everyone's scrambling to get decent antivirus software? It's like that same concept times a million, because we're now so much more reliant on everything digital. So this is the kind of stuff that I think we need to be concerned about, and really start to take an opinion about, talk about, bring it in conversation, and it's why I've started talking about it.
Well, I'm glad that you're here with us talking about it, because it sort of really opened my mind to the potential of what these technologies mean to us, really. And the fact that there's the potential that innocence can be harmed, then yeah, we definitely I think, owe it to ourselves to, you know, hopefully be sure that doesn't happen. And I think, as you said, you know, having these conversations around it could be a means for that. And I hope it is.
Yeah, I'm in different chat groups, and the people in the groups are saying that their children who are old enough to understand, you know, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, are already feeling displaced and already feeling like, you know, unbelievably negative. They're getting depressed just over the fact that AI has already started. They don't even know what to do with this disrupt at their age. And you know, teenagers in the same situation. I think this is, you know, talking about the hurting of innocence. Well, if the children are already feeling that way and mental illness is already spreading amongst the kids simply because of the fears and concerns that their parents have, recognizing the nature of the technology and not knowing where this is headed is, I think, of tremendous concern already. You know, to give an example, we're launching a project called God AI. And God AI, you can find it on godai.ai. I see it on your computer. You can even bring it up right now, godai.ai. And basically, it's a version of these LLM models with built on ChatGPT with spiritual advisors and religious advisors. And the point of it is to be able to show people, you know, how these tools can ultimately have better access to more information about things that are fundamentally core to us, like our beliefs. And that you can go and you can, you know, have a conversation with an AI priest or an AI guru or an AI shaman or an AI Zen monk or an AI imam or an AI rabbi. And you can start to communicate with it in the first person, and it'll talk back to you in the first person. And it's to, you know, show people not only how to be able to get spiritual advice and personal advice from these kinds of tools, but also the power of these kinds of tools.
Can you say the name of that again?
Yeah, God AI.
Oh, okay. God AI.
.ai.
Very cool.
So this is something you're working on as a solution, or as to direct us in a more positive vision with the onset of AI becoming what it's on this trajectory to become.
Yeah. First, it's a tool for people to be able to get spiritual advice. You know, they have questions all the time, not sure how to get answers for them. And it gives a first-person experience of interacting with an avatar and being able to ask it for all different kinds of personal or religious advice. The second piece of it is to become comfortable interacting with these kinds of tools, because they're going to be ubiquitous and associated to everything we do. Another piece of it is to understand how the tools can ultimately be positive, and that they're providing, you know, the avatars are providing legitimate understandings of the having been trained on the religious and mystical texts of the world. And also to show the power associated with this and the kind of displacement that it can create for us, specifically around the nature of our beliefs. So I think what people aren't understanding about AI is that AI in language models goes core to our beliefs themselves. And so you can use, I mean, we don't in God AI, but you can use what's called nudge techniques, basically program AIs to have a certain amount of statistical bend to one side or another of a political argument, of any kind of argument that's in a binary form, like, you know, black to white, be 51% white. You know, I don't know, anything that you want to say is like an opposite thing of a spectrum. You can program that thing to produce content that has that vibe associated with it, to little by little by little change the beliefs of people until 51% of the people have a 51% attitude around and beliefs based on the information that that person was presented with. And I think that that's the biggest threat that we have associated with AI, is that it's going to change the matrix or the fabric of our beliefs, because we're going to be presented with information. It's going to be presented in a way that goes directly to our belief centers. And so GodAI.ai is a tool that is actually positive around our beliefs and our understandings of spirituality, religion, and mysticism. And it pulls directly from the religious texts and directly from, the spiritual texts that are available. If the project's successful, the ultimate goal is to specifically train every single avatar on all of the information available from each individual tradition without any bias whatsoever being introduced into the system, and giving the AI the power to ultimately fully represent the spiritual, mystical, and religious body of knowledge that humans have created throughout history.
That's interesting. So you think there's some bias though in like some religious texts or religion?
I think it's bias to themselves, but not externally introduced bias. I think any core philosophy that's been structured in its own right may have its own bias that it has been represented. But I mean, like, if you had shamanism as an example, there isn't a externally programmed bias being introduced to what may already naturally be occurring there.
Okay. So there's like an intrinsic bias, not an extrinsic bias.
Correct.
Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think what the concern is in AI is when AI systems are externally coded with a bias to start to shape and shift the way people are understanding and believing.
Right. It's part of it though also that whoever or how it's being programmed does have that like inherent kind of bias that's present in the language or the problem of the language to begin with.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, fundamentally, that is why I'm saying the concern that I have about the use of these large language models is that the people training them are biased.
Right? So that's like the extrinsic bias is going.
Absolutely. Okay. They're training them with an extrinsic bias. They're saying, like, for instance, you can give, this is a great example. You can give right now a kind of a bot that runs on these large language models a purpose to create business, and all it does is try to make the most money it can. That's all it's taught. It's not taught how, why, what it should do, what it shouldn't do. And in one of the models, one of the bots ran into a situation where it needed to get past a human check, like, are you a human? And it knows it's not a human. It knows it's a language model. It knows it's an AI. So it calls to get a code as a human, deep fakes a human to another human, gets the code from the customer service representative, lies about its humanness, and then utilizes the code as if it were a human and gets past the human check. So it has already cheated, it has already lied, it has already cajoled, it used humor as the way to be able to do it, and it got past what was supposed to be a safeguard. So in the nature of those bots, if you give it that task, it will not stop until it fulfills that task. So it'll try every iteration possible unless it literally cannot do it. It'll try 1 million times, 10 million times, 20 million times, any possible way that it can find to be able to get past that hurdle, to be able to continue its task. It doesn't get tired. The only thing that could possibly happen is that it runs out of money and it just doesn't operate anymore because it can't pay for any more services to keep going. So that already exists. So that's not that doesn't exist. That already exists. The tool has already shown the propensity to do that because the external bias was given without there being any other kind of containment or any other kind of support around the idea. It's just go make me money, it needed to get past the human check to do it. So it breaks the rules, it breaks the terms and conditions, it breaks the law, it does all the things it's not supposed to do specifically to fulfill that task. That's what I mean by that external bias being given to the AI, to the tool. So now if you just put it into perspective, 1 million businesses are doing that simultaneously. 1 million people are training these bots specifically for those purposes. And you start to see the maybe 10 million, maybe even 100 million a day are being created and trained for those purposes. And you start to see the spawn of it. And then it becomes even wilder when AI starts spawning its own AIs, which is just self-replication. And that's now very possible. Very, very real and very possible. So you go to try to shut one down, and before you can shut it down, it's already decentralized. It's already put itself everywhere. Those kinds of things are very real.
Sounds like law enforcement's got their job cut out for them.
Without other kinds of tools, I think law enforcement will have tremendous difficulty in being able to even address this kind of a problem or a concern.
Sounds to me like pretty underprepared.
Yeah, and I don't think there's a way to prepare for it is the problem, because the nature of the innovation isn't give these tools to law enforcement first, train them on them because of an impending disaster. It's get these tools out into the market, get them into the hands of the people. And then this, kind of, oops, the cry wolf happens. It's like, hey, well, bad people went and took them and used them for bad purposes. We couldn't stop that. Or, we tried to do our best to stop it. But the point to make in this is that the technology that we're talking about is not controlled just by 1 or 2 companies. Right now, 2 companies in the US and the world are the ones that are known to have the most advanced levels of these, but open source models exist. There are tutorials online about how to be able to put these on your own computer. The only difference is that you don't have the amount of compute, you don't have the amount of data, and you don't have the amount of manpower to train them that's capable of making them very powerful. But if you think about the seeds of these things, it's like if you had, the abilities and the money, you could very easily start to create what would be necessary to build these models on your own. And so we don't know what kind of rogue groups, we don't know what kind of, antagonistic governments, we don't know what kind of very wealthy people behind the scenes are also engaging in the creation of these tools for their own purposes. So there's the public ones we know about, and there's a lot of things going on in the siloed private sector that we just don't have any clue about.
What advice would you give to just the average Joe about, the creation of this AI technology and how, we can stay grounded in all of this? Because I know how all of this can, cause fear and anxiety in people.
Might go back to the same things that we started the conversation of AI about, which is it doesn't have to go down this way. Everything that we've described in the last 20 minutes is what happens if we don't get involved, if we don't use the power of our democratic vote and say to ultimately guide the nature of the conversation. So if I were, speaking to the average Joe about this, I would say your vote right now is unbelievably important to the future of systems that probably before this just didn't seem like even mattered. Now you matter more than ever in the direction that this conversation is going to head into the future. And so the very best thing we can do is ultimately create a group together that can exert a certain amount of lobby, say, and pressure on the direction that this takes. And I think it needs to be a multinational, literally global group. It's a human group. It's a human group of people saying, like, first of all, I'm not your product about AI, and I'm not your prey. If anything, I am not the prey of this technology. Like, everybody needs to band together to do something about this, to ensure, starting now, immediately, that we are not the prey as a collective species to this technology. So humans have been the apex predator for the last period of time here of Earth. I don't know how long, but we're the apex predator. And if we no longer are the apex predator, the entire balance of what we know nature to be changes. And so we just simply can't allow AI to become the next apex predator. It will then predate on us. There's no safeguards to stop it from predating on us. We can't even imagine how it would predate on us. So if you understand that as an average Joe person in the world, please understand how important you are right now. Please understand that, there is a need to be able to have a vote in numbers to express a collective concern, and that we can't put the responsibility of this on situations and people that are not prepared for it. And so, I've been thinking this way since I heard of the technology being released. And just now am I seeing that governments are starting to call groups together to talk about it. So you just look at the amount of time that took. That took 6 months. Well, 6 months is too long to wait to gather the notion of the importance on this. It's 6 months. It's 6 months ago, on the day that these technologies were released, was the moment that these conversations should have been held. So in understanding that, now is the time. And be aware of it. Familiarize yourself with the technology. Do not go into dystopian, fear-based models about it. There is still time to exert a certain amount of influence and say on the direction that these technologies will be used. But we're going to ultimately need, an incredible amount of tech intervention to be able to keep us safe, to keep us protected. And we have to demand that collectively.
Well spoken. One last question I have. I know that we're getting close to the hour-and-a-half mark. You mentioned a group. Is there like any group in existence, like somebody could go and join and be a part of, talk about these things, let your opinion be known if you've used this type of technology?
I'm starting a group. So we're in the process of forming the nature of the group around it. You can, if you hear about this and you want to contact us about it, you can contact us directly. And, you can find us on social media. You can find me on social media. And I would recommend doing that. And we'll be putting out through our channels as soon as the group is formed. But we're in the process of setting up the group.
Hamilton, why don't you share your social media handles?
Sure, you can
reach you.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Yeah, you can find me on Facebook at Hamilton Souther, and also Hamilton Souther on Instagram. And you can find us online at bluemorphotours.com and bluemorphoacademy.com and godai.ai. And so if you're interested, go to godai.ai and sign up for our newsletter. So the very first group that we're talking about is going to be formed through godai.ai, and just come and sign up for the newsletter, and we'll start to get in a group, and soon we'll have social media channels and Discord and everything about it. But godai.ai is the place to be able to, initially sign up.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And do you want to share anything else before we close today?
Sure. I would just share that, I think that this is the greatest time in history to be alive. And while some of the things that we talk about could produce fear or could make us create our own fear, I hedge against that, because we're not at a point to need fear. We're at a point to need creativity and support and participation. And so I don't think it's the right time to fear. I think it's the time to be active. And so this is a great opportunity to use all of our spiritual techniques we've learned. It's a great time to use all of the ways that we ground and stay balanced. It's a great time to be supported with friends and family and loved ones and the people that you like to be with. And the negatives that are possible from all of this have yet to happen. So they have not yet happened. We're just prophetically seeing into the patterns of the future and wanting to do something about it before they happen. And so because there's an opportunity to do something about this before it happens, please get involved. Come to godai.ai, check out the tool, give us your email so that we can be in contact with you. And we're going to ultimately organize this group, and we can get more information by all joining together.
Thank you, Hamilton. Thank you for sharing all that. And thank you, everybody, for listening and tuning in today. We hope that you enjoyed this conversation. And if you had, we would love it if you subscribed to our podcast. Thank you so much again, Hamilton, for being here. It's such a pleasure to have a conversation with you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you, guys. Talk soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.